such as meal allowance, extraneous, airtime, and benefits such as house allowance, medical cover, and so forth and so forth. We'd like to see how we can be able to harmonize, reduce some of them, combine some of them, eliminate some of them, because some allowances are being paid for the work you do.
The public wage bill absorbs about 50% of the country's revenue. It is with this in mind that the Commission has, in its strategic plan, deliberately focused on effective management of the public sector wage bill.
Given the significant role the public sector plays in our economy, and which is about 25% of our GDP, prudent management of expenditure, and in particular the management of public sector wage bill, is key to our macroeconomic stability, competitiveness of our economy, and also the ability of the government to provide quality services to its citizenry.
There shall not be a weaker SRC. Why? Because it allowed those who are powerful enough in terms of bargaining power to take public resources in wages and leave nothing for the development of Raia. The ratio should not exceed 35% wage bill to ordinary revenues. So now we are forcing you, Mr. Minister, to go and borrow more and more. What is even worse is you are now going to borrow more Eurobonds, going to borrow more from the Chinese, more from America, when you have lost your capacity to act competent.
You have lost your capacity to act competent. That is the Vice Chairperson of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, Dalmas Otieno, also a former Member of Parliament and a former Cabinet Minister. Now we have the Chair of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, Lyn Mengich. Karibu sana to the show. And I want us to begin from what we just heard from your Vice Chair, quite boldly stating over how the wage bill is affecting the economy in the country. That you're doing 50% of the ordinary revenue, talking about 733 billion shillings for the financial year 2018-19, and now you're projecting the cost could go to 790 billion shillings. I mean, why are we here? Why are we talking about 50% of revenue financing how to run government in terms of wages?
Yeah, let me first state those figures. It's true that our current wage bill is 733 as at 2017-2018 financial year. So yes, it is projected to continue growing. The concern is not really about the absolute amount, but it is the ratio to revenue and the ratio to GDP. So as already stated, you saw that is we are currently at about 50% of ordinary revenue against a target in the Public Management Finance Act of 35%. That is where the concern is, because if we don't achieve these ratios, it means that the money available for development and service delivery is not at the level that we would like to see. So the real concern about wage bill is the fact that wage bill crowds out resources for development and for service delivery. And that's really the reality of where we are today. We're not meeting the revenues that we have set as a country.
So is the target to reduce the expenditure on wages, or to raise the revenue from where you sit? It's got to be, first of all, you've got to look at both sides. One is to increase the revenue, and actually that is the more sustainable strategy when it talks to wage bill. Because if you look at our development goals, if you look at Vision 2030, or you're looking at even the Big Four agenda, our development goals, all that points to a direction of improving services, which means you expect absolute amount of wage bill to continue going up. So that will continue. The real concern, as I said, is about the ratio. How much are you spending of your revenue? So the key focus becomes actually revenue, and then effectively utilizing whatever you're actually currently paying out. Right. So there are two things that we are concerned about. One is increasing revenue means that we need a more productive public sector. So productivity, performance becomes so key to that discussion. And that is about increasing the cake. You increase the cake, then we can share. So that's the focus. The other focus is, as I said, is about efficiently using what you already have. How do you utilize to ensure that that wage that we are paying today
is actually producing what we expect to produce, not just in terms of increasing revenue, but actual service delivery.
Okay, and I look at what your commissioner, that is Kennedy Monchoncho. Yes, good tongue twister. He talks about certain allowances that need to be scrapped. Are you really, is this a main focus that you're looking at?
It is one of them. If I look at the main focus, one is actually, the first one will be about performance and productivity, which definitely we have to work with other stakeholders. The other area which is very important is about the actual number of people that we employ, that we've got to have an optimal staff count. And that is a process, again, we have to work with other stakeholders. The issue about allowances is also another strategy that we will be looking at. And it's not about scrapping. The whole issue, if you listen to him, he talked about harmonizing and streamlining. So it's more about streamlining the allowances, and that may entail different things, as he explained. Some of the allowances could be matched. Some of the allowances are actually obsolete, that you don't really still need to pay. And then there are some that you will need to rationalize. Okay. So it's not about scrapping. It's about streamlining the allowances, and that may include other allowances actually being dropped. Okay. Yeah.
And I take keen interest in what has been happening in the country, and I want to take a look at the judiciary. When I look at, for instance, the gross pay for the Chief Justice is between 990,000 up to 1.32 million shillings, which should be the maximum during his tenure. The DCJ is 821 up to 1.23. But so the salaries go until resident magistrate, which is the entry level into being at the bench, is about 123,000 up to 190,000. But there are so many other benefits that come. That is official transport for the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice, and all judges. There's a medical scheme for judicial officers who sit at the bench of inpatient 10 million, outpatient 300,000, maternity 150,000. So when you look at this, how much of an impact does it make to the cost of wage bill? Because not every Kenyan is lucky to earn such a bracket.
Well, first of all, let me broaden it beyond judiciary, because as you rightly say, that's just an example.
Right.
Now, one of the things that we are concerned about when we talk about wage bill is ability to attract and retain the requisite resources. So when we look at that pay, it's about attracting the right resources, because we also must be able as a country to deliver what it is we want to deliver. So paying a competitive wage is one of the principles of the commission. So that salary that you have mentioned is actually sufficient to attract the skills that is required in the public service. Yes.
Yes, you said that that's about the judiciary, but I want to also speak about the county state officers. For instance, a deputy governor, there's a circular that was issued sometimes in August 2017, that the option for county governments paying rent at the stipulated rates for the designated state officers' residential houses in the county shall cease on 30th of June 2019. That is 2 days ago. And the understanding here was that you had said that for deputy governors of Mombasa, Kisumu, and Nairobi counties, they would receive 185,000 as rent allowance, or for county governments to pay for that. But now you're saying that is limited until June 2019, when county governments need to have constructed official residence. Do you have any indication of whether this has happened, so that would help in reducing that cost?
The majority of the counties have actually not done that, and it is not restricted to deputy governors. So we have state officers who are entitled to a benefit called housing, and that benefit is not a house allowance. It is a house that actually is meant to assist in facilitating state functions. So when we look at that, deputy governor is just one of them. Governor is also the other at the county level. We also have other state officers. So that circular was actually allowing them time to build the houses. As we speak, only a few have done that.
So what happens?
So we have given them an extension to allow them to construct those houses during this period. So there is an extension.
Does it have a timeline?
Yes, it does. We have given it to in the next 2 years.
2 years, that is 2022?
No,
2021.
2021.
2021.
Yes.
June.
Yes.
Okay, so when you look at that, I mean, what would be the saving so that There's a construction, of course it costs money to construct. What is the saving between that and a housing benefit? And I'm talking about this based on the case that was in court before Justice Chacha Mwita, where he indicated that deputy governors are entitled to housing allowance.
That ruling is about housing benefit, not house allowance. So he did rule that they're entitled to that, and what they have is a housing benefit. And it's really important for us to distinguish the two. House allowance vis-a-vis a house benefit. The benefit, as you rightly said, is actually a house, which means it's an asset that belongs to the public. And that is where the savings coming. If I'm getting an allowance, it's a personal benefit.
Right.
And it goes to me, it goes to my pocket. If I'm building a house as an asset, it means that it's going to be there for time, for quite a long time. So there is definitely a savings when you build a house as a benefit, as opposed to taking the money and renting houses. So at the moment where we are is, we really need to go ahead, or the counties need to go ahead, and all the state officers to build those houses, because it is indeed a saving.
Okay. And still talking about the state officers, at the National Executive, you have the gross package for the President being 1.4 million shillings, Deputy President 1.2 million shillings, CS's Secretary to the Cabinet, Attorney General and Chief of Defense Forces 924,000. For PSs, it's 765,000. And the question I want to ask you here is, you just gave a gross pay. How do you explain that vis-a-vis state officers who may demand to have a housing benefit or a housing allowance?
A gross pay, by definition, actually means combined. It is I'm giving you a package or a total pay that combines all the elements. So indeed, previously, state officers used to earn different allowances, which included house allowance and also other allowances. The Commission in 2013 consolidated that pay. And consolidation then, when it was done, once you consolidate pay, then it becomes one package. So where we are at the moment is that pay does include an element of housing in it.
Is that communicated to these officers?
Yes, if you look at the Gazette notice that actually gazetted that pay, 2013, 2017, the Gazette notice clearly says total package, it says consolidated. So that is communicated through the Gazette notice.
Okay. I'm asking that in light of what has been happening with Parliament. Of course, that matter is before court, of where members of Parliament are demanding to have a housing allowance of 250,000 despite receiving a consolidated package. I don't know whether you have anything to say about that, even as we wait for the Chief Justice to constitute a panel of judges to hear the matter.
Well, because the case is in court, I'm not going to talk much about it, but it's just to explain the concept of consolidated pay, which I've already done, which basically says that house allowance is included within the consolidated pay, as communicated in the Gazette notices. Okay.
Now, tell me the place of job evaluation in determining the package that you give to these state officers at the National Executive, at the Parliament and at the judiciary, because you see some disparities there. Some officials, like members of Parliament, would feel they have more work to do because they represent the people, they have activities at the county level, at the constituency level. How do you reconcile job evaluation vis-a-vis what exactly you pay them?
Job evaluation is done to address a very key principle that is actually enshrined in the Constitution, because our mandate is derived from the Constitution. The functions of the Commission is defined there. One of the principles is about equal pay for work of equal value. Now, how do we determine that these jobs are of equal worth? So that is the purpose of job evaluation. So we carry out job evaluation to determine the relative worth of jobs, which then allows us to pay you equal pay for work of equal value. And so that's the role of job evaluation. We evaluate the worth of the job, and that allows us to differentiate pay based on the worth of that job.
And I'm asking that because when I look at the Gazette notice that published the benefits for members of Parliament, apart from the Speaker getting 1.15 million shillings, Deputy Speaker 924,000, majority and minority leaders at both houses 765,000, and members of Parliament and senators 621,000. There are other allowances. For instance, sitting allowance at the committee, the chairperson gets 8,000 shillings. a maximum of 16 meetings a month. For the members, they get 5,000 shillings, a maximum of 16 months. So that would come to 80,000 for members of committees. There are certain members of parliament that are members at different committees. So obviously that can be stretched. There are several Kenyans who feel that these people are being paid for what they are supposed to be doing. How do you explain that?
The Gazette notice, there are two Gazette notices. There is a 2017 and there is a 2013. In 2017, the Gazette notice removed sitting allowances for plenary sittings.
Yes.
Right? But retained for committees. Now, so when you then say, how do we explain this? Actually, when we talk of a worth of a job, then it means the consolidated pay takes into account the actual responsibilities for a job. So it means that if I should not then be paid for doing the same job, which I'm big. So I cannot be paid a sitting allowance for plenary sessions because that is already in the job. So that is what the concept of job evaluation is all about. Now, you've then said, but there are other allowances. So what happens is because not everybody will sit in some of those committees, then you can't give everybody. So there are elements that remains as allowances to distinguish responsibilities that is not applied generally to everybody. So if you look at the pay structure today, there is a consolidated pay, but there are also other allowances. Largely those allowances are non-remunerative. If they are remunerative, it is specific to specific roles. You cannot apply to everybody. So that's how you bring in the allowances.
And that's what I'm asking, because Kenyans feel, for a member of parliament to appear at a committee sitting, and sometimes they appear there for like 10 minutes, then they move to another committee, that is part of your job. Why are you paying such allowances? I mean, what is the reasoning behind it?
Now, when it comes to, and I said there is a 2013 circular, there is a 2017. You may not be aware, but that is also in court. And it is not, you know, there is an issue around that. Because the 2017 circular, which actually abolished a lot of these allowances, is contested at the moment. And it is a matter that is in court. So
that's what I'm asking about specifically for committees. Because the chairperson of a committee is paid 8,000 for a maximum of 16 meetings. A member of a committee is paid 5,000 shillings for a maximum of 16 meetings.
Yes.
But they belong to different committees.
Yes.
So you can actually do 32 meetings.
That is possible. That is possible. So
how do you control that?
There are two things. Okay, one is, as I explained, when it comes to specific responsibilities that you cannot apply to everyone, it makes sense to give allowances. How do we control that? As a commission, we do entrust the different commissions to actually regulate those sittings. So when it comes to the numbers, we don't regulate the numbers, but we do say payable meetings. When we actually advise on payments for these committees, we do say this is the payable meetings per month, right? So basically, when we talk about meetings, it is not open-ended. There is
okay, let's take an example that I am a member of parliament. I belong to the Defense and Foreign Relations Committee, and I also belong to the Education Committee. The Defense and Foreign Relations holds 16 months in the month of July. And then the Education Committee holds 16 meetings in the month of July. How many meetings will I be paid for?
Now, I want to distinguish two elements here is, as a commission, we will give you what you should pay, because that is our mandate, right? Now, we do not decide who sits in what committees. Obviously, you know that is a parliamentary, that's parliament that decides that. Now, who regulates how many meetings, who attends, that is not the purview of the commission, because that is done by a different commission, the Parliamentary Service Commission. So we determine the pay. We will then advise you on what to pay for those committees, but we don't regulate which meetings you attend.
Okay, so based on your Gazette notice, is it to pay a maximum of 16 meetings regardless of the committee, or it's 16 meetings per committee?
It is regardless.
Okay, regardless, so maximum of 16. And how able are you to regulate this? Because yes, you give guidelines, but sometimes we've seen commissions or even independent institutions flouting them. How able are you to enforce what you come up with?
We do have a compliance unit within the commission, and it's not just about, you know, the committees. We do compliance checks to see which institutions are adhering or complying to the different advisories that we give. So we do carry out those compliance. We also work closely with other entities, the Auditor General, the Controller of Budget, so that when they are carrying out their work, they also help us to check those compliance. So, those are in place.
Okay. Would you know the cost of paying the state officers at the National Executive, Judiciary, Senate, and the county governments, as well as the county assemblies?
Beyond the amount that you read?
Yes, I'm talking about the total of paying for state officers in the country.
No, I can't give you the figure right now.
Okay, because I would have wanted to distinguish between
the state and the other
public servants. Okay. So let's talk about the public servants, or the civil servants, if you may call them so. We've been seeing a lot of strikes in the public sector, talk of nurses, doctors, and threats by teachers from time to time. And most of the time, there has been this call for, what do you call them, CBS, that is collective bargaining agreements. But these have been fragmented bids, especially for county workers and the health sector. How best do you think this crisis can be resolved, since it hampers service every other time?
You're right in saying that it does hamper service. As a commission, we do see ourselves as having a role in promoting an environment within the labor sector that is actually stable and more predictable. Our role, specifically when it comes to collective bargaining negotiations, is to advise on what the public sector can pay. Now, the process as is today is that the employer comes to us to advise or to give the parameters or bigons for negotiations. Now, if that process is followed correctly, then the negotiations has to be done within those parameters. What we have seen, though, in the past that has led to a number of strikes is a situation where the employer and the unions go ahead and sign an agreement and have not sought the advisory from the commission. That obviously is unconstitutional, because the constitution is very clear that we must advise you on the parameters. So we have seen instances of agreements signed without the advisory. And when it then comes to implementation, then there are obvious difficulties. You cannot implement something that is not constitutional. So we've seen a lot of that an agreement is signed, it is taken for registration, it cannot be registered because you've not followed the due process, then it is reversed. So obviously it continuously brings unnecessary employee relations is not settled the way it should for failure to follow the process. That is a common one that we see quite a number of times. But obviously the other contributor is, what is the basis of your negotiations?
Right.
Now, as a commission, we have a responsibility to ensure fiscal sustainability of the wage bill. So one of the things that we look at is the economic parameters. Now, if you then enter into a negotiation and you do not look at that element of sustainability, fiscal sustainability, then it causes a problem.
Okay.
Yes.
But there are those who feel that the state officers or the officials at the top, they will sit in an informal sitting, if I may call it kamukunji in the case of parliament. They'll pass resolutions and implement via a commission, or the employer for that matter. And then if there's dissatisfaction from SRC, the dispute goes to court. But when you are talking about, let's say, health workers at the county, they are the mercy of the executive. They will ask for meetings, for audience with their officers through with the government, the county government through the unions. They'll be ignored. They call for a strike. They're ignored. They issue another strike notice. Then they eventually down their tools. They're taken to court and they're told that the strike is illegal. Then they're told that they have to return to work. They go back without anything. So there's some sort of disparity in terms of how they are treated. How do you help them to feel still their services are wanted, but then also their cry is heard without just being told that you did not consult the SRC?
First is, everyone must follow the due process. That is very, very critical. Failure to follow due process means that you end up with the situation that you have described. So how do we help them? As a commission, we engage constantly with these stakeholders to be very clear on what process is expected, what must be taken into account in any agreements. Because if you look at the last situation where there was something agreed, but there is no money allocated to it, that's not fiscally sustainable. And that we see is very common, where you have negotiations, you have an agreement, but there is no money to back it. So that becomes a problem. So basically for me is follow the due process. That will really help us to solve a lot of the problems that we are seeing in the labor sector at the moment. Yeah.
And from where you sit at SRC, have you always been for the fiscal management, ensuring that no new allowances are paid or more money that is paid? But have you also looked at the welfare of workers like nurses? Have you been proactive in determining what their rightful pay should be?
Yes, we do. One of our principles, which I alluded to earlier, is about ensuring ability to attract and retain the requisite skills in the public sector. So the Commission is not about just fiscal sustainability. We have to balance those two. And to answer your question, when it comes to the health sector, those jobs were evaluated through the job evaluation with all other jobs. The relative worth of the job was established, and a commensurate pay was actually given. So indeed, that has gone through that process. There is a collective bargaining agreement that was signed, which gave a remuneration package that was acceptable to both sides. So yes, we do care for the welfare of not just the health sector, but everybody, because it's our constitutional mandate to balance both attraction, retention, and fiscal sustainability. But
sometimes that is rarely seen. We only hear you when there's a strike and you're coming to voice and saying you are not consulted. What is the challenge?
The thing is, there's many times we give advisory and everybody is satisfied. You'll never hear about it, right? You will only hear when there is a disagreement. Unfortunately, that is how it is.
Right.
But I can tell you there are many advisories with many stakeholders. It doesn't even come to the public view at all because they are satisfied and they move on.
Okay.
Yes.
As we wind up, I want us to talk about a little bit about the disparity we find in the public sector. I'm sure you know it because you are working in a sector where there's a president who is earning 1.4 million and then there's a worker who is earning maybe 10,000 or even, I believe, 14,000 or thereabout, based on the minimum wage. I mean, how do you explain this? Because the airtime allowance for a cabinet secretary is 20,000. There's a Kenyan whose gross pay is 20,000 in this country. How do you explain that?
Now, I will give two explanations. One is the reality of the market that we operate in. Now, remember, when we talk about remuneration, we're looking at what that economy pays for that kind of a job. So for the public sector to attract the right skills at the higher level, then that pay has to be also driven by what does the market pay. If we fail to do that, we will not have the right skills. So it's a question of what does the market, and if you look at any CEO today, right, where is their pay? And compare that to the PSS or the CSS, you will see that it is relatively around the market. So that is one factor. However, that does not mean that we are closing our eyes to the disparity, because one of our principles is about fairness, right? Fairness means the disparity between your highest paid and your lowest paid. The Commission over the last few years has actually consistently tried to reduce that ratio, right, which we call compression ratio in remuneration terms. So that has been an effort to do that. Indeed, the Commission in the last advisory improved the terms even at the lower level compared to previous times. But obviously it will not happen overnight. It will be a continuous process. We would like to reduce the compression ratios so that we don't have a huge disparity. It will take time, but it is one of the things we must do.
How soon would that be? I know you say it will take time, but do you see that happening within your term?
The next review cycle, now just to explain, is that we've got the review cycle for remuneration is 4 years. So the 2017 was the last review. So in the next 2 years, we will be issuing the next review. So we will then go through the due process. We look at how do you reduce those ratios within fiscal sustainability. So when you say, will it happen during our time? Yes, there will be something will definitely during the next cycle. Will it achieve the end result? Probably not. It has to also now wait for the next cycle.
And how does that work with your goal to ensure that we control the wage bill, the percentage that, as you put it, you're targeting 35%. So how do you review to increase but still maintain that? I know you spoke of revenue is growing, but you don't have any control over that.
Yes, we don't. And that is why at the point of review, we actually do proper economic studies. We have to look at whatever advisory we give, especially when we do the full review during the cycle, we must take into account all the economic parameters, balance that with the desire of fairness, of equity, attraction, and see what the country can afford. So it always will continue being a balance of fiscal sustainability against the other parameters. I
want to take a look at some of the feedback that is coming through. Yes, we can begin with the SMSs if we have them. Okay, tweets first. This is Kiprotich saying that what we need is to make MP position a two-term system so that we can discourage people who go there and make absurd demands just because they feel entitled. I don't know whether that would work or would make them ask for more because they have limited time. You'll give us a comment on that. On SMS, this is who? This is, you don't leave your name. Madam Chair, those working in public secondary schools are underpaid, yet they have same qualification like those in public service. Evaluate our salary in public secondary schools because they are public entities. You have maybe you can begin by responding to that.
Well, the first one, it's talking about the terms of MPs. Obviously, that is not within our purview. So will it actually reduce the pay? I doubt, but it is really not within our purview. But I don't see how reducing the term will necessarily manage the wage bill.
Right.
The second...
It's about someone saying that they are teachers in the secondary schools, head teachers, and they're being underpaid compared to those in the public service.
Now...
Yet they have the same qualifications.
What is important to note is when we talk about the worth of a job, qualifications is just one factor, right? Because if we were to purely base our worth of jobs on qualifications, we would not be right. So we base it on, yes, qualifications is one, but more importantly, the actual output of that job and the significance of that impact in other parameters.
Right.
So all I can respond is we do look at qualifications. It's not the only one, and we will continuously evaluate the jobs if, as and when a part of the organization feels that our jobs need to be looked at.
Right.
We have a process of continuously evaluating those jobs.
So what control do you have? For instance, when that teacher texts in, I know their salaries are determined by the Teacher Service Commission, and there's a whole process of arriving at those collective bargaining agreements. I mean, when the teachers demand this, the TSC is offering this, and you give your advisory, do you monitor how far they go?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I'll explain why I'm saying that. When we talk about advisory, yes, we do advise. So by the time a collective bargaining agreement is signed, our advisory has been taken into consideration. Now, remember also when you talk about how will it be implemented, it will normally be in the collective bargaining agreement on how it is implemented. So to that extent, it regulates itself because it is specific how long that CBA will last and how it will be implemented.
There is Peter from Mary saying that MPs should not be paid for committee sittings. It is like teachers getting paid for attending staff or Senate meetings. Should they be... There are Senate meetings in schools. Maybe there are. So, of course, you can see the varied opinion on the committee allowances that are paid at the level of that. So the question is, how do you create awareness in as far as explaining why this is being done? Because at the end of the day, your employer is the citizen.
First, let me agree with the comment that I should not be paid for doing the job that I'm already paid for. So if I am in a meeting to discharge my responsibility, I should not get an additional pay because I am in a meeting to facilitate my responsibility. So that has to be clearly distinguished. So when the Commission issued the circular in 2017, that was the principle, and indeed abolished a number of the meetings where I am having a meeting to discharge my job, then I shouldn't be paid, because then it is a double payment. And so I want to agree with that principle, because that is the essence of the circular issue 2017, which I did say, you know, it's a matter in court, and there has been discussions around that, but that was one of the factors that the Commission was trying to achieve. So when then it comes to other meetings that I am not sitting necessarily to discharge my core responsibility, there is a need to pay something, and therefore those are exceptions, they are not the norm.
Just to be sure, yes or no, do you have a problem with the committee allowances, committee sitting allowances in Parliament?
If that sitting is part of my day-to-day job, yes, we have a problem. But if it is not, then it is okay.
No, I need to be clear. Currently, we know that members of Parliament sit in committees.
Yes.
Those allowances they draw, maybe sitting at the Education Committee, do you have a problem with it?
No.
No. Okay, so finally, we've heard of challenges, people saying that they are going to teach SRC a lesson, they are going to cut the budget for SRC. Actually, as we speak, there is a deficit in terms of what you wanted. How does this affect your delivery, and is it so much of an intimidating factor? What does it yield in affecting how you execute your mandate?
Let me confirm that, yes, our budget was cut by Parliament. And what does that mean for the Commission? You see, the Commission is established in the Constitution. The same Constitution provides that the commissions should be adequately resourced. Adequately resourced could be debated about what you mean, but coming back to your specific question, how does it affect the Commission, is there are very key responsibilities that we cannot discharge with our current budget. There are specific responsibilities that will be a key input to the next review cycle, and our current budget, you know, there are things that we cannot do because it will not be accommodated.
Do you mind enumerating some of them?
Yes, I can tell you. For example, for us to give advisory on the next review cycle, we must carry out proper studies on the remuneration, both within the public sector, comparing to private sector, markets, Kenya, other markets. We don't have that budget allocation, right? So that is not there. What does that mean? It means that we will not effectively discharge our mandate. That's just one example. But we also have some that are day-to-day requirements of our budget. For example, reducing rent. If you reduce rent, what does that mean, right? Or you completely decide that there is no budget for legal fees, right? We are a commission, and we are an entity liable to be sued or to sue. So to have a zero budget on something like that,
right?
You know, so basically the budget cut has two implications. One is delivery of core mandate of the commission. There are things we cannot deliver, but there is also the basic day-to-day that you need to run the organization.
So when this budget cut was done, of course you appeared before Parliament to defend your estimates. Do you think it's out of mischief, or is it just about budget rationalization?
If it is rationalization, the cut was a bit deep than compared to any other cut that was done. So I may not be able to say this or that, but the fact of the matter is the budget cuts really were a little bit going too deep.
Too deep.
Yes.
All right. Final views on SMS. If we can take a look at what you've been saying on 2422. This is Charles from Meru, says that, Madam Chair, can you talk of the persistent inequalities in housing allowance among same cadre in different towns? Are you aware some so-called other areas have higher rents than even Nairobi, for instance, Isiolo town? What happened with harmonization of housing allowance? And then finally, we have, you don't leave your name, morning, let SRC look at the welfare of drivers in counties, 26,000, and with families, school fees. As Sarah Serem's time, it was to be harmonized, but not yet. So talking about harmonization of those salaries, what do you say about those two comments?
The first comment is talking about house allowance. House allowance has to be based on the actual rent in different locations. Because if you look at the purpose of the house allowance, even as spelled out in the Employment Act, it is about it is about either you house or you provide money to house. That in essence means that the allowance cannot be the same across the entire country. It has to be based on the rent on different parts of the country.
But usually you give guidelines on Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, then the rest.
Yes, we do.
So how does that work for the different countries? I think that's the important question.
One of the things that we have in our current strategic plan is actually to carry out studies on the actual rent across the country, and it is part of the discussion around harmonization of allowances. So we would like to get data and review and see how far is it aligned to the market, what you're calling other
areas.
Yes.
Your comment to the driver, 26,000 per month, they don't feel that is sufficient to meet what they require to run their families, but also is it the right earning based on job evaluation?
Based on two factors, job evaluation, which is the relative worth of job, based on fiscal sustainability, based on market, the answer is yes. Because we look at those three parameters, we look at drivers in this country, what do they earn, not just in public sector, but we also compare to private sector as well. So yes.
All right, so that's our time. This is Lyn Mengich, the chairperson of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. Thank you so much for making time for us to talk about taming the wage bill. I hope that you, as the viewer, has left this discussion with more information about how that works and what to expect in the coming days of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. That one is giving me trouble. But up next is Zinzi Kibiku, who will be talking about Engage. He has quite a topic. She'll be sure to share with us and see what's happening in the social lives of the people who are dating or people who are in relationships. Back in a moment.